How to create a binge-worthy character. TV is the king of character. So we're going to take a bunch of the greatest television shows of all time, and we're going to look at what makes them so compelling, so you can use that same idea for your novel or screenplay or maybe TV show. The first thing you want to do if you want to create a binge-worthy character is, what you want to do is you want to make them the worst person for the job. Okay? So what does this mean? I don't mean they're bad at it, right? Like, Tony Soprano is a pretty good mob boss. What I mean is we want to take a character, we want to show why they are ill-suited for the job at hand. There's a good saying about storytelling, that all stories are a fish out of water story, because in all stories we're taking a character from where they're comfortable, which is Act 1, and we're putting them where they're uncomfortable, which is Act 2, right? The story. I mean, who's the worst person to run a mafia family? Tony Soprano. We're going to give him anxiety issues, crippling anxiety, a man who has to show strength at every moment, and yet at any moment might pass out from a panic attack. That makes him the worst person for the job. Another good example of this is Mrs. Maisel, right? When we first see Midge Maisel, she is, an upholder of the status quo, right? She is, not only is she a good housewife, she's the best. She can get the rabbi over for dinner and make everybody happy. She's measuring her thighs to make sure they maintain a certain size. She's putting on all makeup and waking up before her husband. I mean, check this scene out. This is a good example of how she's the worst person for the job. Right, now we're going to take this woman and we are going to make her a raunchy 1960s stand-up comic like Lenny Bruce. Right, the contrast of who she is in the beginning and who she's going to become at the end is so wild that is what gives the story its excitement. It also creates an irony. In the book Save the Cat, Blake Snyder talks about one of the secrets to a great log line is that it has an irony, or great ideas. There's some irony to it, right? So the contrast between who your character is and the tasks that they have to take on is really one way to create that irony. I mean, like Walter White's another great example, right? When Vince Gilligan pitched Breaking Bad, he pitched it as, we're going to take Mr. Chips and turn him to Scarface in 10 easy steps. And that contrast of Walter White from who he is in the beginning of the show and who he is in the end is so extraordinary. I mean, you really could do the Breaking Bad story with just about anybody, any suburban dad. Contrast to that would be interesting. But the fact that he's such a family man, the fact that he's, a kindly old, chemistry teacher, brings an irony to the story and makes him the worst person for the job. The Godfather is a great example of this. Let's say we're writing The Godfather. The plot of The Godfather is Godfather's shot, and now his sons have to take over, run the family while he's getting better, and root out his enemies and kill them all. Now, you can make this movie with Sonny. It's James Caan's character. Sonny's a psychopath. Sonny's beating the crap out of people, throwing trash cans over their heads. Sonny's ready to be a mobster. But we don't. We make it about Michael, because Michael doesn't want to be a gangster. Michael, in fact, wants nothing to do with the family. One of the great things about television is we get a lot of really unlikable characters, or characters that are empathetic and not necessarily sympathetic. Peaky Blinders hooks us with Thomas Shelby, who's a gangster. I mean, he's a cutthroat guy who's killing people. He's living off the misery of others, really, when you look at it. But somehow we still love him, and we still are fascinated by these people that are really not the best people. And TV gets away with this, and it does it because it does a couple of tricks right off the bat to hook us. And the Save the Cat trick, and this is from a book by Blake Snyder. It's really popular in Hollywood. But basically what Blake Snyder's general premise is that if your character saves a proverbial cat within the first 15 minutes of the story, then the audience will like him. And what's really good about that is it may give us license for them to not be so likable later, right? Well, I've never quite agreed with the Save the Cat book. I think that actually just as effective as saving the cat is to shit on the protagonist. If you shit on the protagonist, and you shit hard enough on them, then they don't have to be likable. We can just feel empathy for them. We don't have to like them as long as we feel that empathy. So right off the bat, hit us hard with something that makes us feel for them. So I'll show you that we can do the save the cat, we can do the shit on the protagonist, maybe we can do both. Ern from Atlanta, when we first meet Ern. In this scene here, we see Ern is living with his ex-girlfriend, who he has a kid with, but they're not together, right? And he's sort of living there, doesn't really have the money to pay the rent, and it's an awkward situation. And now we find out, oh, he's got a kid, and he seems like a good dad, and that makes us love him. That's the save the cat thing. We look at this guy, he's a good dad, he's playing with his kid's cute, and then automatically, boom, save the cat, we like this guy. The next thing we see, though, is the shit on the protagonist, right? So we save the cat, but we also shit on the protagonist. His girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend, who he's living with and has a kid with, is going on a date tonight, right? And we don't fault her either, and I think the show does a good job of that, so it doesn't make us like demonize her and say, oh, how could she do that to him? We know why she's doing that to him. You can't even say I love you, right? There's something screwed up about this guy. You can't even say I love you. She should be going on a date, right? And so we love her too. But the fact that he's put in such an awkward situation where he's going to live with this woman, he's going to come up with the rent, they have a kid together, and yet she's going on a date, is really painful in a way that's so specific and unique that we feel for this guy right away.
I was going on a date with some corny dude. Yeah, some corny dude. What? No, this is a great environment for you.
And so later on, when he makes, questionable decisions, we can go along with him. Now, the great thing about the shit on the protagonist, save the cat thing, is that if you do it well enough and you do it early on, then your character really can be kind of a bastard later on, right? I'll give you an example on Wolf of Wall Street. It's a really good example of that. When we first see the Wolf of Wall Street, he's a decent guy trying to get by. He's got a family. He's trying to get by with his wife. They're kind of poor. And he goes to work in this Wall Street office, and he's immediately told to, shoot lines of cocaine every 20 minutes and be all kinds of an awful human being. He's given a license. And so we see, if he was just that obnoxious the whole movie, we'd hate him. But because the story takes the time to show us a scene where we save the cat or shit on the protagonist, we can go along. Game of Thrones is genius for this trick, right? Every character is the underdog in some way, right? Jon Snow is a bastard. Tyrion killed his mother in childbirth and is hated by his father. Basically, everybody has something that makes them the underdog, and that's one of the reasons why they're complex characters. We have empathy for them. We can go along for the ride, even when they do things that are pretty terrible. Carmen in The Bear, we love automatically. We see the situation that he's been put in. He's come to save his family's business. He's lost his brother. He's been driven from this high-powered job where he's this incredible chef, couldn't handle it anymore, and he's come back home. So immediately we see this character in a low position that makes us like him. Now, on the flip side, people think, well, if you don't do this, but your character is likable, will we like them? The honest answer is no, we won't. We need this scene. We need some reason to like them. Even if they're good, likable people, it doesn't really matter. Like, if you come in and say, oh, but my character, they're a wonderful family man, they've got a great marriage, everybody loves them, everything's working out for them, then something horrible happens in the story. No, we don't want to watch people like that. First of all, I don't believe they exist. I don't know anybody who's that non-complex, and if they are, I wouldn't want to watch them. We want to watch complex and interesting people. We want to watch broken people. A lot of times because we feel a little broken ourselves, and we relate better. So save the cat, or I prefer shit on the protagonist. Desire is one of the most powerful forces in storytelling. And really, when you see a character, we don't have time to get into who this character is and really get to know them. At least not in the first episode. It might take seasons before we really feel like we know this person. But a sort of shorthand is necessary in storytelling. Something that gets us there really quick. And what gets us there the fastest is desire. Now, in a musical, we'd call this the I Want song. I don't know, I'm a huge fan of musicals, but somebody told me this once, and I'm going with it, okay? In every musical, there is what is called the I Want song. And what the I Want song is basically when the hero comes out and states, this is what I want, this is what I'm so passionate about, and this is what is going to drive the story. That's the most important thing. We understand a strong character desire is what drives the story. And so when your character comes out and sings that right in the beginning, we know what they want and we're along for the ride. Some examples of this: when Walter White drives that RV to the side of the road and confesses to the camera right before he's about to pull the trigger and kill himself, this is what I want. I want to save my family. I did it all for you. I did it all for you. That's his I Want song. And that gives us the understanding of who he is and what his desire is, right? Another example of the I Want song, we first see Mrs. Maisel. She is giving a speech at her own wedding. She says, who gives a speech at her own wedding? Me, I do, right? We get a sense right off the bat that this woman, well, she wants her family intact, but there's also something underneath there. There's a little desire there. There's some desire to express herself that must come out, and we see that right off the bat. The I Want song will drive us, right? You think about I Want songs in media, you've got, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, I want to get the hell out of Kansas. My Shot, I want to make something that lasts forever. Frozen, Let It Go, I just want to be alone and go somewhere where I can be by myself and let my powers out, right? These are the I Want songs. They're powerful because they allow us to understand the character's desire right away, and once we understand that desire, we are along for the ride. We don't need to know a whole lot about the person. All we need to know is their desire. Another really great idea about how we can make a character just absolutely fascinating. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about good functional characters here. We're talking about a character that will keep us coming back week after week to see more story, right? Like TV is just so capable of doing. And, you can have a good, like Luke Skywalker's a good character. He's not, I wouldn't watch a 26 episode TV show about him because he's not complex enough, right? He's simple enough, and that simplicity is a strength for him because it's actually running the story. It's allowing him to be, in a way, a stand-in for us, and, and gives us an in so that we can see ourselves in him. But Tony Soprano is not that, right? Tony Soprano is not a stand-in for us. Tony Soprano is like a deeply complex and troubled and messed up character that keeps us coming back and back and back. A great idea about creating a character like this comes from the book Into the Woods by John York. And what John York says is that if you want your character to be really, really fascinating, make them a Jeckyll and a Hyde. Right? In other words, you're going to actually think about your character as two characters, and that their character is split up into two different worlds, and each one of those worlds has a life that they hide from the other, right? The Jeckyll, the good guy, will have a whole life and world that they need to maintain, that they will be hiding from their other half, the Hyde. So if you start to think of your character as like not one character but two characters with two worlds that they are traveling back and forth into, seeing them really as two characters can be a real way to create complexity. And that's really what we're looking for, is complexity and contradictions. The contradictions are what make a character interesting. And this comes to the core of really what a character is. And this comes from the book Story by Robert McKee, which I talk about a lot because I love it. But you should check that book out if you want to hear more about this. But what McKee says is that a lot of people, when they talk about character, what they're really talking about is characterization, right? We give a character a funny hat and a way of talking, and have them smoke a pipe. That's just characterization. They might be the most colorful character in the world and come in really flamboyantly and weirdly and doing all kinds of stuff. But if they're predictable, if they're not doing anything, taking interesting actions, then they're not a character at all. What really defines a character is the actions that they take. And if those actions are consistent and predictable, then they're probably a boring character. they're more like going with the flow and carried along by the story, then they might not be a very active or interesting character. When we first see Don Draper, he's talking to a waiter, it's a black waiter. This is 1960s, so obviously there's a lot of racial tensions, and we don't normally necessarily see a lot of dudes like Don Draper talking to people of color. And the manager comes over and starts yelling at the waiter saying, "Why are you talking to him? Why are you talking to him?" And Don Draper immediately dresses down that manager and sends him running away, right? And it tells him to fetch him a drink. And then he continues to talk to the waiter. And what's great about this is it does the save the cat thing, right? So again, bringing that back, it saves the cat because now we know, well, this guy's a good guy, right? But then immediately I also understand that the actual reason he's really talking to this guy is not to be nice. It's because he actually wants to find out why this man is so loyal to his brand of cigarettes so he can make a sale and you know, get another account. And this explains the contradictions that Don Draper has throughout the show. He's awful and shitty and terrible to women, right? He's terrible to his wife. He's terrible to his mistresses. He's generally just a kind of a miserable human being. But at the same time, he can like lift somebody like Peggy up, and that contradiction, that unpredictability makes him really interesting. The actions of the character are what make a character interesting, right? I think there's 3 shows that really show this better than anything, right? Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, and The Handmaid's Tale all show character stripped down to its essence, which is what the story is always doing. The story is always stripping us down to our essence, right? And revealing who we are. Right? Like, I'm a pretty nice guy in general, but I also have lived a life where I haven't had to, you know, fight off a lot of painful experiences, right? Like, I'm not living in the zombie apocalypse. Like, you know, I don't know who I really am, and I won't know who I am until the zombie apocalypse hits, and I have to decide whether I'm gonna, like, you know, eat my neighbor or you know, fold up and die or do whatever. I don't know who I am until the story reveals me. And that's basically what story does, right? In a story like Handmaid's Tale, Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, these stories strip their characters down to their essence by testing them as hard as anybody could ever be tested. So in the pilot episode of The Handmaid's Tale, when Offred is ready to stone another handmaiden, and she refuses. This is an unpredictable moment. We don't know that she's going to do this. This is a drastic action that probably is going to get her killed, and it reveals her character. It reveals that stripped down to her essence, there is something good. There is something, you know, purer or more or stronger than most people, and that makes her a pretty unforgettable character. Similar to that in, you know, Walking Dead. You know, The Walking Dead is, I think, the show that ultimately is about this idea that the story strips a character down to its essence. We're constantly seeing people challenge, Rick being the most challenged of all. Rick could be a very boring character in some ways, in that he's almost always doing something good. I mean, he's always, you know, but the story strips him down so hard, it's so hard on him, that even when he maintains a morality somewhere in there, and he still is making so many hard decisions that in a way he might be like one of the greatest leader characters I've ever seen, as he's just capable of making the hardest decisions anybody could ever have to make. Walter White, similar. When we first start off Breaking Bad, Jesse is kind of a scumbag, and Walter White is this good guy trying to save his family. But by the end, the story reveals Jesse to be pretty good and Walter to be one of the worst monsters you've ever seen portrayed in cinema, right? And we're also fascinated by that. It's a fascinating portrayal of a fall and a man turning into evil. A lot of the reason why we are fascinated by characters is wish fulfillment, right? The wish fulfillment of being good at something, right? Being great at something even. You know, so something like Carmen in The Bear, we love him, one, because he's broken and because this empathy has been built for him, but we also love Carmen because he is great at cooking. And it's fascinating to watch somebody be good at something. Fills a fantasy for us. The same thing about Mrs. Maisel, right? The fantasy of getting up on stage and being a great stand-up comic. I mean, even like Breaking Bad is, and in its essence, about a man who's really great at something and really discovers that he's great at something. And I think that even runs the story, even more than trying to save his family in the end. He really wants to be great at something. And what is he great at? He's the best meth cooker in the world.
This is glass grade. You got crystals in here 2 inches, 3 inches long. This is pure glass.
Hey, in America, we respect the best at everything, right? Well, no matter what it is. Another thing we're talking about here is that when you say you want a character to have qualities, right? You don't want to think in terms of qualities. That's hard to write. Instead, think of a scene which shows us this, right? So if you are trying to show me that this character has contradictions, show me the scene in which they do something contradictory. If you want to show me that this character is somebody I should love, show them doing something good, or show the world shitting on them so that I can fall in love with them. You want to show me that they're good at something. Don't tell me they're good at something. Show them be great.
It's called a carousel. Lets us travel the way a child travels. Round and around, and back home again.
One way to make a character complex, give your character a ghost. What do I mean by ghost? I don't mean flying around with a sheet kind of ghost. What a ghost is a thing that haunts you. It's a sin or some horrible thing from your past that is maybe why you're broken. And often the ghost may come out in the form of a monologue. A character might, some point of the story, maybe towards, late act 2, early act 3, they might come out with this ghost and tell us about it. A good example of ghost is Fleabag. When we first see Fleabag, she is a gross character in a way that's really, really funny and really, really entertaining. But in the end, when we realize that the reason she's on this fall and she's so broken and such a mess right now is her ghost. So the ghost is a thing that forms whatever is wrong with you that makes you broken, and we're attracted to broken characters. So that ghost is going to be the moment that broke you. The ghost also might be the cause of what we call the lie. When I talk about the lie, what I mean is the lie the protagonist believes. In a story, often the theme can be found by looking at the lie, right? So the lie the protagonist believes is a fundamental belief system the story revolves around. And actually, in many ways, the story exists to haze your character out of believing this lie, right? And the lie often is going to be hinted at first, because we don't want it to be too obvious. We don't want to show the audience the lie in such an obvious way that they understand and see the theme coming a million miles away. What we're going to do initially is we're going to show the lie in a scene early on. This is a scene I call the off-balance scene. It's a moment early on in Act 1 where we show there's some little hint, there's something wrong with this character, and that thing that's wrong is what this story is going to be about. In Killing Eve, when we first see Eve, there's this little hint early on, this scene right here. She's talking to her husband, and she's cutting herself with a knife. And she's got this great monologue about what she would do to him if she wanted to murder him. And she's planned it all.
I'd paralyze you with saxitoxin and suffocate you in your sleep. Chop you into the smallest bits I could manage, boil you down, put you in a blender, then take you to work in a flask and flush you down a restaurant toilet.
And we begin to see that there's something a little off about Eve here. Eve is a little bit too obsessed with blood and guts and murder. That gives us a good hint that later on Eve is going to go on a journey where she becomes a little too close to Villanelle. and that this obsession with blood and guts and murder is going to send her onto a downward spiral, which is what the show is going to be about. Another good example of the lie was Mrs. Maisel. Mrs. Maisel wants to hold on to her, crappy marriage with Joel with every ounce of strength she has in her. And when he tells her he's leaving her for his secretary, it breaks her. But she should leave Joel. We all know that, right? She has a calling to become this stand-up comic, and the job of a stand-up comic is to break apart the social mores, right? This is the scene where we see Mrs. Maisel's lie established. Her mom tells her, "I'm afraid for your baby because she's got a big forehead, and I'm worried she's not going to be pretty."
I just want her to be happy. It's easier to be happy when you're pretty. You're right, bangs will help.
So that's the lie. Life is better if you're pretty. That's a pretty harsh lie to tell a woman, especially when you're talking about a little baby. And that lie is baked into Mrs. Maisel's identity. We can see that lie gives a birth to the ghost for her, whatever that ghost is. I don't know if we ever see that scene in the show, but it's just that behavior that she learned from her parents and from society and from everything around her has baked the lie into her character. Now, characters can have 3 kinds of arcs within a story, and in the next video we'll talk about what those 3 arcs can be and how that understanding that flaw or that lie can lead you to understand the theme.